Welcome to Fractal Focus, the podcast where innovation meets entrepreneurship. My name is Philip Lorenzo, the COO of Fractal Group, and thank you for listening to another episode of this great podcast. My guest today is Justin Leech, and the reason why we're talking is related to Folsom Tech Week. And of course, we had an episode with Sadie St. Lawrence, and we're going to have more guests that came from that event. But Justin has a really important place in this event. He actually participated in a hackathon, Folsom Tech Week. He won the hackathon with his team. And on top of that, he got to present his results to the mayor of Folsom, the city manager of Folsom, to start driving solutions through See-Click Fix. And so, Justin, welcome to the show. You're far more than a hackathon participant, and we're going to get into that. But say a few words. Say hello to the audience.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. And you mentioned the Folsom Tech Week. I was delighted to hear that it was being put on, and a lot of my local contacts had made me aware of it. As a close to lifelong resident of the Sacramento area, as well as having worked with a lot of startups and investors and venture capital, private equity groups, I looked at that as something that I just really wanted to be involved in, to kind of support the innovation that's going on in my hometown. It was a wonderful event.
Yeah, I think what was important about Folsom Tech Week was to see this community come to life almost in real time. And I kind of want to hear from your words as someone who really loves the area. You're a Sacramento native, so you're from the area. You've done so many different things in the Sacramento area. We're going to get into that. But tell me in your words, how did it feel to see the community come out the way that it did for this event, especially where you are in your stage of your career?
Well, sure. Yeah. So there's been a great ecosystem driven by, I would say, a handful of individuals and entities around the Sacramento region. I think of Rich Foreman. I think of groups like, Startup Folsom or the Growth Factory or Moneta Ventures are all local tech and investment related groups that didn't really exist 20 years ago. And I think way back and as Folsom and Sacramento were, I would say growing up, and we've got a really great community that is building on each other. And it was really seen in small groups and small events up until Folsom Tech Week, and to see several hundred people in one location and all of the great minds and great enthusiasm that I already knew was there, but we hadn't really been in one place at one time, was a great thing to see. So it didn't necessarily exceed my expectations. I knew about what to expect, but definitely was unique in that hasn't happened before, to my knowledge, with the exception of maybe our TED events.
So now I'd like to dive a little bit into you, because I think it's important to add context as to why we're talking. And again, I don't want to always tell people you're exceptional and all that stuff, because we all are trying our best every day. But I think your life experience and the paths that you've gone to is exceptional. So if you don't mind sharing with the audience your time in Sacramento, the careers that you've experienced to get to the point that you are now as a group benefits expert, as someone in the tech space, really having expertise in a very human part of it. So I'd love for you to get into that a bit for our audience to get to know you.
Sure. I think there's probably three noteworthy things that I would kind of break my career and experience into. Growing up, family business was an interior design firm, and worked residential new construction. I spent most of my career in the building industry in one way or another, from granite fabrication to distribution. And so, kind of seeing the building in the physical sense. when I moved into the industry I'm in now, and essentially consulting for group healthcare, was right after the Affordable Care Act was signed. And coincidentally, this is the 15th anniversary of the signing of the Affordable Care Act is this week.
Wow.
And, we've seen all the evolution. I tell everyone that I joined the industry right after they shook the snow globe. So they had stability up until that point. And so as far as I'm concerned, it's supposed to be chaos.
Okay.
And so everything is changing relatively all the time. But we're keeping track of what those are to tell our clients how do they manage what they currently have and where the industry is evolving. So I've always loved the puzzles of getting the right pieces in place to solve the problem at hand. And that's where I really dig in is I get inspired by the minutia in getting, understanding the fine details of the puzzle so that I can explain a landscape to an underwriter. Had one of those great conversations yesterday with starting the conversation with, I know this is really weird and I've got to explain a lot of things with you about a business landscape and new divisions and thinner contracts and where they need their revenue. And when we got done with maybe a 15-minute conversation, those underwriters could say, I get what you're trying to accomplish, and here's how we're going to solve it. And so we get to a meeting of the minds and do what's best for the client, take care of employees. And so that's always a great thing too. Third, I spent 2 decades as an outdoor guide. I call it my job when I'm not working. So I spent a lot of time in the mountains. And it's a way to kind of inspire people to do things that they maybe wouldn't have done on their own, getting over a level of fear and a level of comfort. I also look at the synergy of what I do in my daily life versus what I do, in my leisure time or in that guiding role, where I have some maybe personal proverbs like, don't strain your ability and your safety net simultaneously. You get to pick and choose.
Mm-hmm.
And risk management as well as the challenge together. I tend to decorate my office with some of those memories. But when I think of the strategy piece, I have a lot of overlaps. I tend to use mountaineering analogies when I'm explaining a concept, because that's close to my heart and makes it a little bit more interesting for the people I get to interact with.
I think what's great about your experience, both professionally, but also personally in your connection to, and let's get some context here. This is an audio podcast, but if we ever release the video, you're going to see the background behind Justin. And there are mountains and landscapes behind him that represent, I feel like, and you can definitely expound on this, where you feel most at home. And I think, if I'm bold enough to say, technology and our obsession with it, and especially people that are in the tech world, we need to still connect with nature, and we still need to connect with the ground beneath your feet. So if you don't mind talking about the photos behind you, and tell me a bit about, because you already talked about your analogies, you just spoke on that. And I think there's something there about the value that brings. So I'd like for you to talk about the photos behind you, but also talk about how that also, a little bit further into how that influences the way that you approach problem solving in the tech space.
Awesome. So for me personally, I need to find times that I can turn my brain off. So that when I'm addressing, important urgent issues, that they can have all my concentration. And then if I'm not doing something maybe active that requires my entire brain, I have half my brain that's still running on that problem that I'm probably going to address later. And so I don't really have a chance to disconnect. So I've found that things like rock climbing, there are certain points where you don't have the ability to calve off half your brain to think about something else. So that's always been good for me personally. But these photos that you were referring to behind me, really quick version of that day. I put it as probably one of my top 5 days ever. That was a little bit of an unexpected journey. I get a phone call from a friend. This is the year after COVID started in 2021. Unsolicited invite that just says, can you be in Yosemite on this day? And I looked at my calendar and thought, yeah, I can make that work. What are we doing? And, and I hadn't talked to Angie in a couple of years, and she'd moved out of state, but was a good friend of mine that I served on a nonprofit board with. And she mentioned, I want to climb Cathedral Peak in Tuolumne. It had always been on my list of things that I wanted to do, but never got around to it. And so thought, sure, I can be there. I'll make time. I'll meet you in Yosemite. And about 5 minutes later, I get a text from another friend that I hadn't seen in a couple of years because of COVID, and said, hey, it's going to be a group of 3. So I'm like, great. So the 3 of us are all going to go climb this peak. I know they invited me just to make it a low stress day. I can handle the gear, I could lead, make everybody safe. I act as like the father figure and make sure everybody has snacks and is happy. And Angie shared one of her favorite sayings is about epic adventures is just make sure you drink enough water and eat enough snacks that you don't cry. So we set out on this day, and I had planned on, looking at the guidebook on how long does it take to hike out there, to climb, to descend, to hike out, and had hoped to be back to the car somewhere close to sunset. We took headlamps saying we're going to hike back in the dark. But it turns out that we were getting to the summit maybe an hour before dark. So we're sitting on a summit pinnacle that's about the size of a picnic table that drops off sheer on all 4 sides, appreciating the view, but having some urgency to get off the mountain and get home. And Angie decides to tell us why we're there. And so we can see our car parked on the highway 4 miles from there. We can see the view. We can see the sun setting. And she describes being in a hospital bed about a year and a half prior. She'd been going through breast cancer treatment. We all knew it. She was, living in Seattle, and so you couldn't really be there for a friend. But, I'd sent dinner to her and her family a few times, and everybody knew she was going through it, but didn't really realize the gravity of the situation. And she'd been through chemo, radiation, surgery, laying in a hospital bed, and she thought to herself that climbing that peak one more time was her getting her life back. And so we kind of absorbed that, sitting and watching the view and knowing the day we'd had. And it really changed the spirit of the day. And you asked, comparing what do I do in my leisure time and how that impacts how I solve problems in the business and tech world. I think those experiences are similar in that we're using our knowledge to improve the human condition, to make an impact for people.
Yeah.
And when you can put those 2 together in some way, it comes out as so much more impactful and so much more satisfying to be able to be the problem solver or be the hero when it's appropriate, and knowing that it mattered to someone.
There's so much depth to that answer. And I hope our audience appreciates that depth, because often when we're talking about the topics that we cover in this podcast, which is entrepreneurship meets innovation, we don't get into us as human beings and what we're going through when we're making decisions, what we're going through when we're approaching a difficult task, whether it's going through cancer, whether it's going through injury, whether it's, getting over your fear of scaling a mountain. Like, there's so much there, right? And we could talk about this probably for another 2 hours. So with that said, there is something that I kind of want to segue into, because I do want to talk about the hackathon, and I do want to talk about the See Click Fix work that you did. And you mentioned in our pre-talk, asking better questions, getting better answers.
Mm-hmm.
And the segue is in your work on the hackathon for See Click Fix, because this was a project that really looked to improve the relationship with AI with this product, and do it in a way that we can elicit better questions and get better answers and use that data appropriately to solve problems within the city of Folsom and the greater area. So if you could talk about the experience, a few things, and this will probably give you an opportunity to have a long answer, but tell me about your experience working on the hackathon, working with the team that you got to work with, that some people I think you might have known before and some people you just met, and tell me how that experience of building that product in a couple days was in line with your narrative, was in line with asking better questions, getting better answers, and everything else that we just discussed.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that framing intro. So we had talked about the benefits consulting firm that I founded is Curiosity Benefits Consulting, and it's here in Sacramento region, but we work with multi-state employers across the country. The spirit of the name is I look back over my career and realized that, it was never a big logo. It was never a widget. How I always helped clients and really moved the needle for them was asking better questions, being inquisitive, so that I could explain that landscape and solve a real problem. And in hindsight, because of the hackathon, I kind of realized that my daily work is a hackathon of sorts, a little bit different than the project that we put on at the Folsom Tech Week. But I found a familiarity with identifying what the real problem was. So the hackathon was put on in collaboration with the city of Folsom, and they had asked, what are the things that we need help with in our current structure, just context for the listeners, and wanting to be involved in as much as I could during Tech Week to make connections and meet people throughout the week, sat in on the initial part of hackathon and thought, I wasn't totally sure how I was going to fit into that, thinking I'm not a developer or a programmer. But as we dug into the problem, I realized that there was a lot to be done about defining what the actual problem was, because we started to brainstorm about this thing exists. And from our perspective, what are all the problems that need to be fixed? And we brainstormed through those before filtering, yes, this is our perspective, but we're not building this for us. So we put together a number of interviews with the city of Folsom, some the vice mayor, code enforcement, Parks and Rec, and a number of other people to say, how do you see this? If you put a wish list together, what would you like to do with this system and how can we augment it? And what we drilled down to was the ability to mine 17 years worth of data in their system in a quick and understandable way. And so doing that as a team, we started looking at how do we make this usable to City of Folsom employees who, like myself, aren't programmers that are going to put together a language to digest all this information. They're mostly people that are going to say, I'd like to ask it a plain English type of question and give me back a plain English type of answer. And so as we dug into that, we wanted to review what was currently in the system. So kind of statically look backwards and say, do we have insights? We built heat maps. We got the AI tool that we built to put itself in the role of the city manager and start prioritizing and giving an outline of what should be top priorities based on its analysis of the data. We also looked at the concept that in the future, the data is going to change and they're going to be wanting to ask similar questions and develop trend lines and understand how their policy changes have impacted that data. And we're able to present that, within a couple of days of starting the project during the conference. And then last week, we were able to sit down with the city council and expand on that, again, to get their perspectives on where this was valuable, how they might roll it out, and making that a usable tool within the city on a broad basis.
Amazing, for one. And I'd imagine the city's response must have been positive, right? Because at this point, we're embracing this technology in the positive sense. Could you tell us the reaction of the city? Could you tell us what the city manager thought? Could you give us some insight into just the feeling you were getting when you were presenting this innovative solution to the city?
Yeah, so I think in the city council meeting, there's definitely one mindset around how this works, and then I'll contrast that with maybe the people on the street, the end user of the system.
Good call. Yeah.
So city council is excited about all of the things that they don't know, because there's a box with all this information and they can't review it in a digestible way. And we've already got insights, and there will be ways to use this so that they can get the pulse on what's happening in the city through all this data. So they're very excited about it. They have, I would say, a mid-level embrace of technology from the leadership standpoint. But part of why they were leaning on Tech Week and all the minds we had together was that they didn't have the tribal knowledge to create something like this themselves. And so we're at a point where we could just hand over the model and say, here's how it works. But what we're planning to do, which is a little bit more in the spirit of solving exactly the right problem before we start streamlining things, is they're going to have continued internal conversations, because we just scratched the surface in a couple of days to talk to a number of people. But I think in each of their divisions, they want to have conversations about, what does your wish list look like? And what are the type of things do you think we should mine this for, so that we can get a tool that does all of those things on a micro basis, and then are able to build APIs to pull new data, to deliver a report to someone in that role rather than having them have to ask for it. And so there's defining the problem and then rolling it out on a scale basis that just makes it less friction, more seamless, so that it's going to get used. So we don't have the extra clicks that might prevent someone from looking for the data.
Are you thinking of this product that you've built during the hackathon beyond the confines of Folsom? Are you thinking about this as a potential product? This is where the entrepreneurial side maybe comes in a little bit, right? Because you've been an entrepreneur yourself. Is there a feeling you're getting, or is there quantifiable data that you're looking at that feels like this could be beyond the city of Folsom and beyond the greater Sacramento area?
Yeah, that was definitely volunteered to us from City Council, because the platform that we're constructing this to work with is used across the country. There are a lot of municipalities that use it, and it's done a great job for what it was built for. And so, the neighboring city of Rancho Cordova definitely uses it and is definitely excited about technology. And so that would probably be, they are the first people that are saying, hey, you're working on this, I'd like to talk to you next. And so there's definitely some potential there. I wouldn't say I've quantified it, or that wasn't a premeditated result for working on the project. But I think the more that we iron out the details on this, the more applicable it'll be. And that may be something that we can help, the GovTech program that exists now improve the product or make it more functional. Or it might be something that, on the side, we just know that we have the ability, and we'd already interacted with the vendor to say that building an API, they're totally open to it. They gave us the instruction manual to say, here's how you connect to our system, because it's not protected data. So they're really open to doing that. And anyone that wanted to do something like we've done would have the ability to.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And it is interesting, right, that you didn't have at that moment you were creating it, the instinct, or not the instinct, but certainly the thought to expand it out. But it took someone else to say, by the way, this could be something you can continue to iterate and then install in other municipalities and cities software.
Yeah. I promised to contrast city council to the end users.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that. Yeah.
Yeah, and this was something that I made a point to pause. So there were 33,000 incidents that had been processed through the program. And, that's triaged within the city employees and sent to the right place, whether it's Parks and Rec or code enforcement, or, a vendor that picks up shopping carts, or one that fills potholes, and they've gone through all this stuff. when you talk to the people who are, I guess, living the data on a daily basis, there's a certain level of, I know exactly what all this data says, because it comes across my desk every day. And, at the very least, from seat of the pants, they're not removed from the data like city council is. So their wish list was a little bit different, and thinking of streamlining flow or how do I make their jobs easier. But I also felt it was important to say they've gone through 33,000 tasks and resolved for the residents of Folsom. And from a city council standpoint or leadership standpoint, they're looking at how do we bridge the gap between where we're doing and what we want to, or where we want to be. And I recommended that this is also an opportunity to applaud all the work from the end users, the frontline workers who are actually doing the jobs. That, can you believe that we've responded to 33,000 requests from the city? And they've had the opportunity to do that. They got visibility from the residents saying, thank you for letting us know. And now we can actually solve this and make the city a better place. So I like both halves of that we can, use the data to celebrate as well as find gaps.
That is the mindset of any good entrepreneur, I think, or any good innovator, is to celebrate those moments, to celebrate the work, but then go, wait a minute, there's a lot more to do, right? Like, you can't just sit in your laurels. So as we close out, what is the one thing you want to tell our audience about not only the experience of the hackathon for you, but also maybe in a couple sentences, some good nugget of wisdom about especially being an entrepreneur in this space that isn't a programmer, that isn't on the technical side, the way that we think of technical side, right? You're not in a command line. You're not typing in prompts, with VS Code. There's things you don't get to do, but if you can leave our audience with a piece of advice or maybe just some nuggets of wisdom about I don't want to lead the witness here, make it clear. But definitely, if in your own words, express to people why it's so important to at least dip your toe in the waters of innovation and technology.
You made me have two thoughts. I thought of an Elon Musk quote of, the worst case is to optimize a thing that shouldn't exist. And that was a little bit of like defining our problem.
Right.
And I appreciate that. For myself, I consider myself tech adjacent. There are a lot of things that touch my clients and data flow that I work in, that's very common. But for me, in the spirit of technology and the spirit of what I do, is understanding the problem, the need, and the goal, and being able to put a roadmap together. And accessing the right tools along the way, or having a toolbox. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're the one building it, which is definitely the case for what we did during Hackathon. It's the existence of AI models. It's the existence of a GovTech platform that we're integrating it with. It's the shared knowledge of a group, for each of us to grab onto something that we have knowledge of. Patrick had worked with C-Click Fix in the past. Both Jeff and Chris had AI models that they were interested in. From our conversation today, I like to ask more questions. And so that helped me guide the rest of the team, or helped me draw a picture so that we collectively knew where we were going. And I think that tech is not a thing, it's an ecosystem, and that we'll continue to mold that ecosystem towards better things as we move ahead.
That's a good summation. I like that. And especially the part about ecosystem, which is another segue for me. So we were just speaking with Justin Leech, group benefits expert in the greater Sacramento area in Folsom, and talking about his experience working on the hackathon. So this is the part where I get to brag a little bit about what we do. And so Fractal Group also has a company called FYC Labs, which actually sponsored the hackathon with the city. And so it is a point where I'd like to remind everybody that's listening that entrepreneurship and innovation is really important to cultivate, and Fractal Group strives to do that. And so from systems-driven service businesses to innovative new ventures to the work that we do in angel investments and also building community. And so we're so grateful, Justin, that you got to participate in something that we worked on together to a degree. I mean, I didn't get to work with you on the project, but certainly just being able to be adjacent to your group and also being able to, here's the spoiler, I was also at that, that meeting with the city manager and the mayor. But I think it's so valuable to continue to make these small efforts to grow a tech community, especially in a place like Folsom, especially in a place in the greater Sacramento area that isn't traditionally looked at as a tech hub, even though it should be, because there's also semiconductor manufacturing there. There is also a lot of different adjacent things. You're close to the Bay Area, so there's a lot of synergy. I hate that word, but I can't think of anything else. So with that, Justin, thank you once again for participating, for being part of the first episodes of the Fractal Focus podcast. This probably is going to be episode 6, I think. So 6 or 7. So you're in the first 10, and we'll see where this continues to go. Is there anywhere online where people can find you or get to know you, get to see more of those great mountain pictures behind you?
Yeah, so definitely look us up on curiositybenefits.com. We launched have our website for the work that we do every day, and definitely find me on LinkedIn. I typically only post something on LinkedIn where I feel it's profound and worth sharing with the world. So if you're up for a 5-minute read, scroll through my LinkedIn and you'll find something interesting, or at least that I feel is.
That is rad.
Thanks for having me, Phil.
Thanks for being here. And if you want to know more about the Fractal Group, go to fractalgroup.io. You can find out more about everything that we do, including our family of companies. And so with that, I leave you with this. Continue to stay innovative, continue to be a great entrepreneur, and more importantly, stay ahead of the curve. Take care. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Fractal Focus. We hope you found valuable insights. If you enjoyed the conversation and want to stay updated on the latest trends and expert advice, make sure you subscribe and leave a review. Your support helps us continue bringing you the content that drives your business forward. Until next time, keep innovating and stay ahead of the curve.